Eddie Cantor, October 10, 1964, born Isidore Itzkowitz, was an American illustrated song performer, comedian, dancer, singer, actor and songwriter. Familiar to Broadway, radio, movie and early television audiences, this apostle of pep was regarded almost as a family member by millions because his top-rated radio shows revealed intimate stories and amusing anecdotes about his wife Ida and 5 daughters. Some of his hits include Makin Whoopee, Ida, If You Knew Susie, Ma. He's Making Eyes at Me, Margie, and How You Gonna Keep 'Em Down on the Farm. He also wrote a few songs, including Merrily We Roll Along, the Merrie Melodies Warner Bros. Cartoon theme. His eye-rolling song and dance routines eventually led to his nickname, Banjo Eyes. In 1933, the artist Frederick J. Garner caricatured Cantor with large round eyes resembling the drum-like pot of a banjo. Cantor's eyes became his trademark, often exaggerated in illustrations, and leading to his appearance on Broadway in the musical Banjo Eyes. His charity and humanitarian work was extensive, and he is credited with coining the phrase and helping to develop the March of Dimes. Biography: Cantor was born in New York City, the son of Russian Jewish immigrants, Mita and Makin Eyes. The precise date of his birth is unknown. His mother died in childbirth 1 year after his birth, and his father died of pneumonia when Eddie was 2, leaving him to be raised by his beloved grandmother, Esther Cantor. As a child, he attended Surprise Lake Camp. A misunderstanding when signing her grandson for school gave him her last name of Cantor. Esther died on January 29, 1917, 2 days before he signed a long-term contract with Florence Ziegfeld Jr. to appear in his Follies. He had adopted the first name Eddie, when he met his future wife Ida Tobias in 1913, because she felt that Izzy wasn't the right name for an actor. Cantor married Ida in 1914. They had 5 daughters, Marjorie, Natalie, Edna, Marilyn and Janet, who provided comic fodder for Cantor's long-time running gag, especially on radio, about his 5 unmarriageable daughters. Several radio historians, including Gerald Nachman, have said that this gag did not always sit well with the girls. He was the second president of the Screen Actors Guild, serving from 1933 to 1935. He invented the title The March of Dimes for the donation campaigns of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, which was organized to combat polio. It was a play on the March of Time newsreels popular at the time. He began the first campaign on his radio show in January 1938, asking people to mail a dime to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. At that time, Roosevelt was assumed to be the most notable American victim of polio. Other entertainers joined in the appeal via their own shows, and the White House mail room was deluged with 2,680,000 dimes. Cantor was awarded an honorary Academy Award in 1956 for distinguished service to the film industry. Following the death of daughter Marjorie at the age of 44, both Eddie's and Ida's health declined rapidly. Ida died in August 1962 of cardiac insufficiency. On October 10, 1964 in Beverly Hills, California, Eddie Cantor suffered another heart attack and died, aged 72. He was buried in Hillside Memorial Park Cemetery in Culver City, California. Stage, saloon songs to vaudeville. By his early teens Cantor began winning talent contests at local theaters and started appearing on stage. One of his earliest paying jobs was doubling as a waiter and performer, singing for tips at Carey Walsh's Coney Island Saloon, where a young Jimmy Durante accompanied him on piano. He made his first public appearance in vaudeville in 1907 at New York's Clinton Music Hall. In 1912, he was the only performer over the age of 20 to appear in Gus Edwards' Kid Cabaret, where he created his first blackface character, Jefferson. He later toured with Al Lee as the team Cantor and Lee. Critical praise from that show got the attention of Broadway's top producer, Florence Ziegfeld, who gave Cantor a spot in the Ziegfeld Rooftop Post show, Midnight Frolic. Broadway. A year later, Cantor made his Broadway debut in the Ziegfeld Follies of 1917. He continued in the Follies until 1927, a period considered the best years of the long-running revue. For several years Cantor co-starred in an act with pioneer comedian Bert Williams, both appearing in blackface. Cantor played Williams's fresh-talking son. Other co-stars with Cantor during his time in the Follies included Will Rogers, Marilyn Miller, Fanny Brice and W.C. Fields. He moved on to stardom in book musicals, starting with Kid Boots and Whoopee. On tour with Banjo Eyes, he romanced the unknown Jacqueline Suzanne, who had a small part in the show, and went on to become the best-selling author of Valley of the Dolls. Ziegfeld Follies of 1917 a Euro Review a Euro Performer, Ziegfeld Follies of 1918 a Euro Review a Euro Performer, co-composer and co-lyricist for Broadway's Not a Bad Place After All with Harry Ruby, Ziegfeld Follies of 1919 a Euro Review a Euro Performer, lyricist for Oh, She's There, Last Rose of Summer, Ziegfeld Follies of 1920 a Euro Review a Euro composer for Green River, composer and lyricist for Every Blossom I See Reminds Me of You, and I Found a Baby on My Doorstep, The Midnight Rounders of 1920 a Euro Review a Euro Performer, Broadway Brevities of 1920 a Euro Review a Euro Performer, Make It Snappy a Euro Review a Euro Performer, co-bookwriter, Ziegfeld Follies of 1923 a Euro Review a Euro sketch writer, Kid Boots a Euro musical comedy a Euro actor in the role of Kid Boots, Ziegfeld Follies of 1927 a Euro Review a Euro Performer, co-bookwriter, Whoopee. A Euro musical comedy a Euro actor in the role of Henry Williams, Eddie Cantor at the Palace a Euro solo performance, Banjo Eyes a Euro musical comedy a Euro actor in the role of Owen Trowbridge, Nullably a Euro musical comedy a Euro co-producer, radio and recordings, radio. Cantor appeared on radio as early as February 3, 1922, as indicated by this news item from Connecticut's Bridgeport Telegram. Local radio operators listened to one of the finest programs yet produced over the radiophone last night. The program of entertainment, which included some of the stars of Broadway musical comedy in vaudeville, was broadcast from the Newark, NJ station WDY and the Pittsburgh station KDKA, both of the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company. The Newark entertainment started at 7 o'clock, a children's half-hour of music and fairy stories. 7:35. Hawaiian airs and violin solo. 8:00, news of the day. And at 8:20, a radio party with nationally known comedians participating. 9:55, Allington Times signals and 10:01, a government weather report. G. Nothnagle, who conducts a radiophone station at his home 176 Waldemar Avenue, said last night that he was delighted with the program, especially with the numbers sung by Eddie Cantor. The weather conditions are excellent for receiving, he continued, the tone and the quality of the messages was fine. Cantor's appearance with Rudy Vallee on Vallee's The Fleischmann's Yeast Hour on February 5, 1931 led to a 4-week tryout with NBC's The Chase and Sanborn Hour. Replacing Maurice Chevalier, who was returning to Paris, Cantor joined Chase and Sanborn on September 13, 1931. This hour-long Sunday evening variety series teamed Cantor with announcer Jimmy Wallington and violinist Dave Rubinoff. The show established Cantor as a leading comedian, and his script writer, David Friedman, as a Euro-OEV captain of comedy. A Euro Friedman's team included, among others, Samuel Doc Kurtzman, who also wrote for Song and Dance Man, Al Jolson, and the comedian Jack Benny. Cantor soon became the world's highest-paid radio star. His shows began with a crowd chanting "We want Cantor. We want Cantor," a phrase said to have originated in vaudeville, when the audience chanted to chase off an act on the bill before Cantor. Cantor's theme song was his own lyric to the Leo Robin Richard Whiting song, 1 Hour with You. His radio sidekicks included Bert Gordon, and Harry Park. Cantor also discovered and helped guide the career of singer Dinah Shore, first featuring her on his radio show in 1940, as well as other performers, including Deanna Durbin, Bobby Breen and Eddie Fisher. Indicative of his effect on the mass audience, he agreed in November 1934 to introduce a new song by the songwriters J. Fred Coots and Haven Gillespie that other well-known artists had rejected as being silly and childish. The song, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, immediately had orders for 100,000 copies of sheet music the next day. It sold 400,000 copies by Christmas of that year. His NBC radio show, Time to Smile, was broadcast from 1940 to 1946, followed by his Pabst Blue Ribbon show from 1946 through 1949. He also served as MC of the $64 question during 1949 €50, and hosted a weekly disc jockey program for Philip Morris during the 1952 €53 season. In addition to film and radio, Cantor recorded for Hit of the Week Records, then again for Columbia, for Banner and Decca and various small labels. His heavy political involvement began early in his career, including his participation in the strike to form Actors' Equity in 1919, provoking the anger of father figure and producer, Florence Ziegfeld. At the 1939 New York World's Fair, Cantor publicly denounced anti-Semitic radio personality Father Charles Corlin and was dropped by his sponsor, Camel Cigarettes. A year and a half later, it was his friend Jack Benny who was able to get him back on the air. Recordings: Cantor began making phonograph records in 1917, recording both comedy songs and routines and popular songs of the day, first for Victor, then for Aeolian Vocalion, Path the Copyright and Emerson. From 1921 through 1925 he had an exclusive contract with Columbia Records, returning to Victor for the remainder of the decade. Cantor was one of the era's most successful entertainers, but the 1929 stock market crash took away his multi-millionaire status and left him deeply in debt. However, Cantor's relentless attention to his own earnings in order to avoid the poverty he knew growing up caused him to use his writing talent, quickly building a new bank account with his highly popular, best-selling books of humor and cartoons about his experience, called Short. A Saga of Wailing Wall Street in 1929 AC, and Yoo-Hoo, Prosperity. Cantor was also a composer, with his most famous song seldom attributed to him. In 1935, along with Charles Tobias and Murray Melodies, Cantor wrote Merrily We Roll Along, which he recorded in the 1950s. It was adapted as the theme song for the Merrie Melodies series of animated cartoons, distributed by Warner Bros. Pictures between 1937 and 1964. Cantor himself was frequently caricatured in Warner cartoons of the period. Film and television. Cantor also bounced back between movies and radio. He had previously appeared in a number of short films, performing his Follies songs and comedy routines, and 2 silent features in the 1920s. He was offered the lead in The Jazz Singer after it was turned down by George Jessel. Cantor also turned the role down, but he became a leading Hollywood star in 1930 with a film version of Whoopee. Shot in 2-color Technicolor. He continued making films over the next 2 decades until his last starring role in If You Knew Susie. Filmography: A Few Moments with Eddie Cantor, star of Kid Boots, Special Delivery A Ziegfeld Midnight Frolic, glorifying the American girl, That Party in Person, Insurance, Getting a Ticket, Whoopee. Palmy Days, Talking Screen Snapshots, The Kid from Spain, Roman Scandals, The Hollywood Gadabout, Kid Millions, Strike Me Pink, Ali Baba Goes to Town, The March of Time Volume 4, Issue 5, 40 Little Mothers, Thank Your Lucky Stars, Show Business, Hollywood Canteen, Screen Snapshots, Radio Shows, American Creed, Meet Mr. Mischief, If You Knew Susie, Screen Snapshots, Hollywood's Happy Homes, The Story of Will Rogers, Screen Snapshots, Memorial to Al Jolson, The Eddie Cantor Story, Television. On May 25, 1944, pioneer television station WPTZ in Philadelphia presented a special, all-star telecast which was also seen in New York over WNBT and featured cut-ins from their Rockefeller Center studios. Cantor, one of the first major stars to agree to appear on television, was to sing We're Having a Baby, My Baby and Me. Arriving shortly before airtime at the New York studios, Cantor was reportedly told to cut the song because the NBC New York censors considered some of the lyrics too risque copyright. Cantor refused, claiming no time to prepare an alternative number. NBC relented, but the sound was cut and the picture blurred on certain lines in the song. This is considered the first instance of television censorship. In the early 1950s, he was one of the alternating hosts of the television show The Colgate Comedy Hour, in which he would introduce variety acts and play comic characters like Maxie the Taxi. However, the show landed Cantor in an unlikely controversy when a young Sammy Davis, Jr. appeared as a guest performer. Cantor embraced Davis and mopped Davis's brow with his handkerchief after his performance. When worried sponsors led NBC to threaten cancellation of the show, Cantor's response was to book Davis for 2 more weeks. Cantor suffered a heart attack following a September 1952 Colgate broadcast, and thereafter, curtailed his appearances until his final program in 1954. In 1955, he appeared in a film series for syndication and a year later, appeared in 2 dramatic roles. He continued to appear as a guest on several shows, and was last seen on the NBC color broadcast of The Future Lies Ahead on January 22, 1960, which also featured Mort Sahl. Eddie Cantor has been portrayed as a recurring character on HBO's series Boardwalk Empire, beginning with the introduction of the show in 2010, where he is played by Steven DeRosa. Cantor's character appeared in 3 episodes of the show's first season, 1 episode of the second season, 2 of the third and 1 of the fourth seasons. Animation: Cantor appears in caricature form in numerous Looney Tunes cartoons produced for Warner Bros., although he was often voiced by an imitator. Beginning with I Like Mountain Music, other animated Cantor cameos include Shuffle Off to Buffalo and Billboard Frolics. Eddie Cantor is one of the 4 Down on Their Luck stars snubbed by Elmer Fudd in her unregistered trademark S Up, Doc. In Farm Frolics, a horse, asked by the narrator to do a canter, promptly launches into a singing, dancing, eye-rolling impression. The Cantor gag that got the most mileage, however, was his oft-repeated wish for a son after 5 famous daughters. Slap Happy Puppy features an Eddie cackler a rooster who wants a boy, to little avail. Other references can be found in Baby Bottleneck and Circus Today. In Merrie Melodies, the Cuckoo Nut Grove Cantor's many daughters are referenced by a group of singing quintuplet girls. In Porky unregistered trademark S Naughty Nephew a swimming Cantor gleefully adopts a boy. An animated Cantor also appears prominently in Walt Disney's Mother Goose Goes Hollywood as Little Jack Horner, who sings Sing a Song of Sixpence. Books and merchandising. Cantor's popularity led to merchandising of such products as Eddie Cantor's Tell It to the Judge game from Parker Brothers. In 1933, a set of 12 Eddie Cantor caricatures by Frederick J. Garner were published by Brown and Bigelow. These advertising cards were purchased in bulk as a direct mail item by such businesses as auto body shops, funeral directors, dental laboratories and vegetable wholesale dealers. With the full set, companies could mail a single Cantor card each month for a year to their selected special customers as an ongoing promotion. Cantor was often caricatured on the covers of sheet music and in magazines and newspapers. Cantor was depicted as a balloon in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, one of the very few balloons based on a real person. In addition to Caught Short, Cantor wrote or co-wrote at least 7 other books, including booklets released by the then-fledgling firm of Simon & Schuster, with Cantor unregistered trademark S name on the cover. Customers paid $1 and received the booklet with a penny embedded in the hardcover. They sold well, and H. L. Mencken asserted that these books did more to pull America out of the Great Depression than all government measures combined. Bibliography: My Life is in Your Hands by Eddie Cantor with David Friedman. Harper and Brothers. Caught Short. A Saga of Wailing Wall Street by Eddie Cantor Simon & Schuster, Between the Acts by Eddie Cantor Simon & Schuster, Yoo-Hoo, Prosperity. The Eddie Cantor 5-Year Plan by Eddie Cantor with David Friedman. Simon & Schuster, Rothwell Smith, Paul. Silent Films. The Performers ISBN 9781907540325, The Rise of the Goldbergs by Gertrude Berg Ford by Eddie Cantor. Bass and Company. Your Next President. by Eddie Cantor with David Friedman, Illis. By S. L. Hidman. Ray Long and Richard O. Smith, Incorporated. Eddie Cantor in an Hour with You, A Big Little Book Whitman, Eddie Cantor Song and Joke Book Illis. By Ben Harris. M. Whitmark and Sons, Ziegfeld, The Great Glorifier by Eddie Cantor with David Friedman. Alfred H. King, World's Book of Best Jokes by Eddie Cantor World Publishing Company. Hello, Mama by George Jessel Forward by Eddie Cantor, Illis. By Carl Rose. World Publishing Company. Take My Life by Eddie Cantor with Jane Kessner Ardmore. Doubleday, No Man Stands Alone by Barney Ross Forward by Eddie Cantor. B. Lippincott Company. The Way I See It by Eddie Cantor with Phyllis Rosenta, ed. Prentice Hall, As I Remember Them by Eddie Cantor Dual, Sloan and Pierce, Yoo-Hoo, Prosperity. And Caught Short. By Eddie Cantor Greenwood Press, The Golden Age of Sound Comedy, Comic Films and Comedians of the 30s by Donald W. McCaffrey A.S. Barnes, Radio Comedy by Arthur Frank Wertheim Oxford University Press, The Vaudevillians, A Dictionary of Vaudeville Performers by Anthony Slide Arlington House, American Vaudeville as Seen by Its Contemporaries by Charles W. Stein, ed. Alfred A. Knopf, Eddie Cantor, A Life in Show Business by Gregory Koza Luke McFarland, Eddie Cantor, A Bio-Bibliography by James Fisher Greenwood Press, Banjo Eyes, Eddie Cantor and the Birth of Modern Stardom by Herbert G. Goldman Oxford University Press, The Great American Broadcast, A Celebration of Radio's Golden Age by Leonard Moulton Dutton, My Life is in Your Hands and Take My Life by Eddie Cantor Cooper Square Press, Film Clowns of the Depression, 12 Defining Comic Performances by Wes D. Goering McFarland, Eddie Cantor in Laughland by Harold Sherman Kessinger Publishing, Tributes, Cantor was profiled on the program This Is Your Life, in which an unsuspecting person would be surprised on live television by host Ralph Edwards, with a half-hour tribute. Cantor was the only subject who was told of the surprise in advance. He was recovering from a heart attack and it was felt that the shock might harm him. On October 29, 1995, as part of a nationwide celebration of the 75th anniversary of radio, he was posthumously inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame at Chicago's Museum of Broadcasting Communication. In 1953, Warner Bros., in an attempt to duplicate the box office success of The Jolson Story, filmed a big-budget Technicolor feature film, The Eddie Cantor Story. The film found an audience but might have done better with someone else in the leading role. Actor Keith Brassel played Cantor as a caricature with high-pressure dialogue and bulging eyes wide open. The fact that Brassel was considerably taller than Cantor didn't lend realism either. Eddie and Ida Cantor was seen in a brief prologue and epilogue set in a projection room, where they are watching Brassel in action. At the end of the film, Eddie tells Ida, "I never looked better in my life," and gives the audience a knowing, incredulous look. George Burns, in his memoir All My Best Friends, claimed that Warner Brothers created a miracle producing the movie and that it made Eddie Cantor's life boring. Something closer to the real Eddie Cantor story is his self-produced 1944 feature show Business, A Valentine to Vaudeville and Show Folks that was RKO's top-grossing film that year. Probably the best summary of Cantor's career is in one of the Colgate Comedy Hour shows. The Colgate Hour was a virtual video autobiography, with Cantor recounting his career, singing his familiar hits, and recreating his singing Waiter days with his old pal Jimmy Durante. This show has been issued on DVD as Eddie Cantor in person. Cantor appears as a recurring character, played by Stephen DeRosa, on the HBO series Boardwalk Empire. Sources: Goldman, Herbert G. Banjo Eyes, Eddie Cantor and the Birth of Modern Stardom. New York, Oxford University Press. Watch, A Few Moments with Eddie Cantor, star of Kid Boots, a 6-minute film made in phono film by Lee DeForest featuring Cantor telling monologues and singing 2 songs. Listen to, Command Performance March 1, 1942 Ep 001 Euro Eddie Cantor, Command Performance 1942-04-01 Ep 006 K Kaiser and Eddie Cantor, The Chase and Sandball Now with Eddie Cantor, Free OTR, The Eddie Cantor Show, OTR Network Library. The Eddie Cantor Show, references. External links. Eddie Cantor at the Internet Movie Database, Eddie Cantor at the Internet Broadway Database, Eddie Cantor official site, Cantor's Sidekick, Bert the Mad Russian Gordon at WFMU, Eddie Cantor at Virtual History.